Hi everyone, my name is David Cahill and you are very welcome to the Technology Ireland ICT Skillnet webinar series, which is aptly named Lock Down Your Learnings. So today's webinar is called Securing a 24/7 by 365 organization. Just before I kick off, really, my bit of background on myself. So I'm the Security Strategy and Architecture Manager in AIB, which is primarily focused on safe change and innovation across the bank. In terms of my experience, I'm 16 years in InfoSec now for my sins. So primarily focused, obviously, in the financial services space. So a lot of experience across a broad portfolio of projects. So most recently, including cloud migration, mobility and collaboration, endpoint detection and response. Hence the topic of my conversation today. So really around the 365 element and the remote working and mobility. In terms of the agenda, a brief introduction in terms of the digital transformation, our approach to that, what the components parts are, the collaboration tools that we're deploying on mobility devices and a lot of organizations are, and then the additional security tools that we can overlay on top of them to make sure we're enabling the business securely. So just to set the scene here, similar to that famous clip on BBC not so long ago, we may get visitors throughout the course of my presentation. I have 2 kids under 4 in the house with me, so I'm sure many people are in a similar situation during COVID and everyone working from home and working remotely. So just setting the context there in case we get any visitors. Why do we need to do anything in terms of the digital transformation and the move to cloud and 365 available organizations? Well, firstly, AIB, like pretty much every organization out there, or a lot of organization out there now, we're no longer a 9-to-5 business. Our customers rely on us 24/7 by 365. And sustaining this growing demand is absolutely key, because if we fail to meet our customers' expectations and our customers' requirements, then it's not too good for the business's sustainability. So that's where we're at. In terms of technology itself, so I'm sure most of you will agree, technology itself ages quite quickly. And in order to address that and to reduce the risk of service disruption and mounting costs, we have to upgrade it and make sure that it's refreshed on a constant basis. Modernising the tools that we use is key as well. So that's touching on what I'm going to talk about greater detail there around the mobility piece and making sure that we have greater mobility. So what do I mean by that? That we can access our assets and our corporate tools in a mobile manner and in a remote location, like most people are in the COVID environment at the moment, but also in terms of greater collaboration. So again, I'll touch on this in further detail later on, but traditionally when people were working remotely, they might not have had access to the full productivity suite in terms of the tools and processes that they had access to in a remote environment, whereas that's really not sustainable anymore. That if we're working in a remote environment, we need to have full access to our tools in order to do our roles and make the business a success. So the next point then is in terms of moving to the cloud. In terms of this 365 piece and the digital transformation, cloud is enabling much greater agility, both in how we work and how we manage our data. So what do I mean by that? So for a tangible example would be a bank, like a lot of businesses would have particularly busy times of the year where customer demand exceeds other times of the year. So I think Christmas would be a good example of that. So when there's a huge increase in terms of customer demand, in terms of whether they're purchasing products either in person or they're doing financial transactions online, we need to be more agile in terms of the resources we can make available to them, and we need to be able to burst up and burst down in terms of those resources. And the cloud is a really good resource in terms of making that flexibility in order to be able to do that. Technology underpins our commitments, really all of our commitments. So what do I mean by that? For example, in terms of our customers and our stakeholder commitments, Our branches, for example, physical interactions with customers are still key to this day. I know there is obviously a pivot towards online for a lot of transactions, but the branches still have a key role to play. So, for example, in AIB, we have a large branch network in the Republic of Ireland, but also in Northern Ireland and mainland UK. So we have to continue to support that and the interactions with physical interactions on a daily basis. So we need the IT backbone to do that. We have customer contacts. So, for example, call centers. Obviously, we need to support those in terms of customer engagement. So whether that's telephony or video collaboration, there's a lot that goes into support of that. In terms of regulatory reviews, we need to support our colleagues across the bank in delivering regulatory compliance. So like any other regulated entity, there's a lot of compliance mandates. So for example, you could be looking at something like PII, personally identifiable information. There's a lot of control requirements around that. For example, who has access, what format it is in, how is it transferred, does it have an encryption applied, what European-wide regulations do we have to be in compliance with, for example, GDPR. So there's quite a lot to consider there. Then in terms of productivity and the technology underpinning that. So there's literally millions of hours of screen time across our organization on an annual basis, as you can imagine. When you've got the guts of 10,000 people, that adds up over the course of a calendar year. You've got a significant amount of digital interactions. So for example, what do I mean by digital interactions? I mean email, I mean Skype, I mean instant message, video messaging. There's literally thousands of daily active users, and each with their own individual use cases. So as I say, their use cases could be audio only, they could be audio and video, they could be instant message. Each user can have an individual use case, and that has to be supported from a technology perspective, and it has to be persistent and available at all time. I guess the context that all of those technologies are operating within, again, they have to be available on a consistent 24/7, 365 basis. And that's not just for users in a bricks and mortar office, in the head office locations, in the branches, in the remote access locations when people are working from home, like the moment during COVID, also in locations like data centers. A couple of additional considerations. Why do we need to do anything here? Why do we need to go with this digital transformation and the constant availability? Well, if you look at traditional on-premise technology and services, you've got a number of legacy challenges there. So for example, technical support for your solutions, be they software or hardware, feeding and watering appliances, for example. So if you have a physical bit of tin that's doing an encryption, or if it's doing malware analysis, like that box has to be maintained, it has to be patched, it has to be software upgraded, it has to be monitored in terms of availability. You need an on-site team, be it a SOC or a tech ops team, in order to do that. You need to refresh the tin on a periodic basis. Typically, you're not going to get more than 5 years out of hardware in terms of support from a vendor, so you have to build in your refresh strategies there as well. So in terms of the industry cloud adoption, then that's a driver in terms of the on-premise and the legacy challenges. I've put up there, vendors are forcing cloud adoption through aggressive licensing roadmaps. I guess a nicer way of saying that would be they are encouraging cloud adoption, strongly encouraging. And there are a number of challenges with that in terms of you could potentially get locked in as part of a cloud migration. You could be signing up to something over a prolonged period of time. There could be licensing implications in terms of how you currently utilize a service on-premise versus in the cloud. You could be signing up to an evergreen regime. So, I mean, what that refers to is that you're essentially making sure that your technology is constantly refreshed and there's no legacy, which is great. But you could have to deal with the constant cost of change then, because if software versions and services are being constantly upgraded, well, then what are the support processes that look like that behind it? So for your organization, you may have to update your support teams, your service desk, and so on and so forth. So there are implications. I guess in order to address these risks or these challenges, what we need to do is identify our key assets and what controls do those key assets require. So kind of consistently what I would see is that people assume, an organization assume that all services and all controls have to be applied consistently, whereas really what I'd recommend is you need an understanding of your assets first, what your key assets are, how you measure them, how you classify them. then you look at the controls that are required to those key assets. So for example, we could deal with these cloud challenges by establishing cloud security foundations. So these could be things like, having a cloud access security broker that sits between you and your cloud services. It could be a multi-factor authentication solution. It could be encryption data, which could be enforced through your cloud access security broker. You could also look at soft controls like the right to audit and the right to get compliance reports from your cloud provider. The overall context here is that this isn't something that we can ignore in terms of the cloud adoption and 24/7 availability, because if we do that, we're going to fall behind our customer expectations, and our business is not going to be able to perform as it needs to. So then in terms of the mobility piece, so when we're looking at mobile devices, be they mobile phones or tablets or be they laptops, we need to look at a mobility solution, security solution. So one such example is around Microsoft Intune, and that's a component of enterprise mobility and security, or EMS for short, that manages devices and applications. If we look at kind of the legacy approach to mobile devices, they would have been very much kind of simple connectivity in terms of, you've got your calendar, your contacts, and your email, but beyond that, there wasn't too much exciting going on in terms of actual integration with your organization's applications. The advantage with Intune is that it's going to give you access to your 365 full suite, so stuff like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneDrive, and really have that collaboration opportunity. So the other advantage with EMS is that it integrates with your identity, your Active Directory, for example. So for identity and access control and good stuff like information protection, for data protection, again coming back to the compliance piece. When used with Office 365, you could have your organization's workforce enabled to be productive of all their devices, regardless of the type, whether it's a mobile device, again, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a laptop, whilst at the same time keeping your organization's data secure. So just in terms of the mobility components then, so I've spoken about having an MDM tool in place, so mobile device management. So for example, Intune. Then having Windows Autopilot in place. What do I mean by Autopilot? I mean such that when devices are shipped, so when the laptop devices are shipped, that they can be automatically enrolled and automatically enabled, rather than having to rely on your service desk manually setting up each user. Another component is Intune, or managed mobile device management for Windows 10. So again, actually managing the Windows 10, the full-blown operating system, rather than just a mobile operating system. And then some of the additional security controls, which I referred to at the start there, which is Windows Defender, which is advanced threat prevention for Windows 10, the operating system again. Enterprise mobility management with Intune. So again, Intune helps businesses manage all of their devices accessing the corporate network while controlling access to corporate data and improving IT security. So again, looking at that mobile device management aspect, but also looking at the application management itself and what controls, what security wrappers can you put around each of the applications. You can see a few called out there. So whether it's Word, whether it's PowerPoint, Excel, OneDrive, so on and so forth. So what are your management options then? Well, from a mobile device management perspective, you can look at configuring your devices to ensure they meet company security and health standards. You can have certificates and Wi-Fi or virtual private network profiles in order to access corporate services. So that, again, the advantage of that is obviously the increased security, but it also means, a good example there is with a Wi-Fi certificate installed, what you could do is anytime you're near a corporate network, that the device will automatically enroll and automatically connect to the Wi-Fi network, which is a nice advantage to have. From a device management perspective, you can report on and measure device compliance to corporate standards. So for example, if you stay within your information security policy, then you can't access particular categories of apps or particular categories of data, well, then you can actually enforce that and report on them such that you have metrics to show who's using what and whether the device is in compliance or not. So for example, if a device is jailbroken or has not been upgraded to the most recent OS version, you could state that you can't connect to the organization's corporate network. From an application management perspective, then you can assign mobile apps to employees. So you're not corporate approved apps, you're not waiting on the user to manually download these apps. You can actually push them out and force them out automatically for the user. So again, that automation piece, which is reducing friction or reducing pressure on your service desk, which is positive. You can configure apps with standardized settings that are used when the applications run. So again, you might look at disabling copy and paste such that they can't copy data outside of a corporate app. You can also automatically remove corporate data from a mobile app. So for example, if the device falls out of compliance, if they haven't upgraded it to an OS, or if there's a critical vulnerability, you could automatically pull all the corporate device data off the device, which is very useful. And then you can also track and report on mobile app usage. So where that might come in useful is that if you've got a particular app for employee training, whether it's security training or financial training or any other type of mandated training as per your information security policy, you could actually report on the utilization of that and how many people are actually utilizing it. In terms of the lifecycle management piece, the Intune enables organizations to manage devices throughout the entire lifecycle. So that's right through from device enrollment and provisioning to management and protection, and then through to retirement of the device. So when an employee leaves the company, or in the unfortunate event when a device is lost or stolen, and that's all using one management console. So again, it's much more simple to use, and it's got that consolidated kind of single, I know it's cliched, but single cliche of glass, single pane of glass in terms of that reporting and management aspect. The end users also have the ability to enroll their own devices and install recommended company apps from the self-service company portal, which I'll talk more about shortly. I'm not going to go through, I know there's a lot of content there, but how does Intune enable a secure workplace? That's available 24/7. So you're looking at core security concepts there. So for example, identity and access management, multi-factor authentication, conditional access. So what do I mean by that? So for example, what access is the user authorized for? Where is the device? Where are they attempting to access the corporate resource for? Or is their device in compliance? And if all of those conditions are met, well, then you're granted access to the corporate assets. Other good stuff like Azure Active Directory for authentication and authorization. So what that essentially acts as is a broker between your cloud-based services and your on-prem. So you can actually go out, service the identification piece, but then bring it back on-prem for your on-prem components. So for example, if you have Microsoft Exchange or your email server on-site, that's where the connection can be authenticated and authorized. And then you've also got, as I referenced earlier, good stuff like information protection and compliance policies. You've also got threat protection, so configuration policies, how are the devices mandated to be configured, identity protection, and again, advanced threat analytics, so looking at threats like zero-day threats as opposed to just your basic antivirus capability. So Autopilot, which I referred to earlier, so at a high level, what this is about is kind of just making it as simplistic as possible from the user's perspective. So essentially they unbox and turn on their off-the-shelf Windows PC, and then they can transform it into a corporate asset with full access to their productivity suite with minimal user interaction, and then the device is ready for productive use. So I guess the analogy being used there is that deploying Windows devices is as simple as getting a new phone. So it really is just unbox it and turn it on. Bit of marketing slide here, but it's just calling out the best experience really is for users and for the IT department is a combination of have that autopilot piece, but also with the mobility management piece, because that'll give you access to the full Office 365 suite, the software, the updates, the features, and then the user-driven data as well. So having access to a centralized repository that can be used on remote devices. So for example, OneDrive for business as your repository. And again, all been ready for productive use. So I'm not going to go through all the details in this slide either, but I guess just to articulate there, you've got an autopilot process, and this is what it looks like from a back-end team perspective. So from the support desk and the IT perspective. So you've got steps 1 to 8. The first one being you identify the users that you want to deploy this technology to. You send them, and this is kind of what we found in the wild, what works best in terms of approach, is that you actually send them a communication in advance about the upcoming technology change. You add users to the relevant security group and assign a license and an autopilot permission to them. You send a user guide to them in terms of moving data from OneDrive. And really the advantage of that is data that they access, I guess, in the head office locations is also going to be available through their mobility devices. And that's really where the advantage is. Step 6 is key there. So that's what they're talking about there is importing a hardware hash to Intune. And what that's for is that, for example, if a device was misplaced or stolen, whatever the case may be, by having a combination of the device hardware hash and the user ID, it doesn't really matter from a security perspective if the device is mislaid or someone else tries to access it, because you need the combination of those two factors, the user ID and the hardware hash. So they're not going to match if, for example, you're swapping SIMs or if you're trying to use user IDs in a separate device. So that's kind of the overview of the perspective from the back end or the support team. So in terms of the user-driven perspective, what does it look like? So again, not going to go through all of this, but I guess the key points there are, from a user's perspective, literally they unpacked the device, the Windows 10 laptop, they unpack it, they connect it to a power source, power it up, they're prompted to connect to their local Wi-Fi connection. At that point, they enter their corporate credentials and they log on. And it's at that point the autopilot process begins automatically. So the device is upgraded to Windows 10 Enterprise Edition. It automatically enrolls them to the mobile device management solution. It installs their core application. So for example, if you were using, Citrix or Cisco for remote access, it installs those core applications for you. It pushes out the baseline security configuration profiles, which I referred to earlier, so the minimum compliance status that's required. Then at that point, the users can access any of their Office 365 core applications. So for example, Microsoft Teams or Skype from the newly enrolled corporate laptop, from their remote or from their home environment. So again, that's really just a summary of the slide there, but I guess the key point to call out there is in terms of step 3. So it's a really customized user experience. So despite connecting to a cloud-based service and Azure Active Directory, the user's still getting a company-specific logo and consistent sign-in text that they would in a head office location. So it's like being in your office as normal. The mobile device management policies are automatically applied. Some of you might remember trying to enroll mobility or mobile devices a couple of years ago, and it was a real pain in terms of the manually having to add profiles onto Android and iOS devices, whereas all that pain is gone now and it's configured and the device is brought into compliance automatically. So then looking at the endpoint protection, so what security controls are we overlaying in terms of advanced threat prevention? Advanced threat prevention is really what's the differentiator there. It's about the differentiation between, zero-day advanced threat protection versus standard AV functionality. And what that does is it gives you threat and vulnerability management, as I said. The attack surface is reduced because there are heuristics and protection mechanisms against zero-day threats. It's not relying on signature-based legacy technologies. You've got endpoint detection and response. So for example, if a laptop device is infected with malware, you have the ability to actually, address that and disconnect the device from the network and clean it up remotely and automatically. The investigation and remediation, as I say, is done centrally and it's done automatically without having to rely on a phone call to the end user and getting them to run through a number of steps. This bit I think is really useful. So in terms of applying risk score to remote devices or mobile devices, if you look at the RAG status there, clear being you do know what to turn the device into is really the most secure and hardened version. But at the same time, you don't want to turn your device into a paperweight. So I've seen that before where, for example, if you disable screenshots or copy and pasting entirely on a device, well then the user, it essentially becomes unusable for the users and they're going to send it back to you. Low would be a risk score, be a good balance between restrictive OS and threat management. That's kind of the recommended. Medium would be the default option or kind of how it shifts, and that would be perhaps appropriate based on your organization's risk appetite. And then high would be a significant risk. And again, that would be if the device was out of compliance or there was malware on it. And in that case, it's obviously not suitable for corporate use. And you can use that automated remediation I spoke about earlier, which is the key point, and automatically disconnect it from the network based on the risk score. Reporting, again, just the advantage there is it gives you that visibility across your entire estate. So whether it's your mobile devices, tablets, or laptops, and you're getting the machine health and compliance report in one location and centralized into your security or your security operations team. But my perspective and the Irish Information Security Forum, if you go to the ISF website there and you click on industry news if you're interested in any more information, but you'll find details on the cyber skills courses that ICT Skillnet make example. So they really have a comprehensive list of courses there. They have, for example, master's level cybersecurity qualifications. down to really more specific and granular learning opportunities. So, for example, the Cisco Learning Academy, which I've leveraged myself. It's a really good tool. I've shared it with my team. But as I say, they're available, great resources, and available through ICT Skillnet, and also you can get information on the Irish Information Security Forum. By all means, take a look on the website, and if you're interested in any of the topics there, please do get in touch. I think I managed to get through the 30 minutes without any toddlers popping in like that, but I'm sure they're not far away. So thanks for your attention. What I might do is just take a look at the Q&A section there. Had you remote working capability before COVID-19, or did COVID require a quick response in case of technology or security? So that's a really good question. So we were in a fortunate perspective or position in terms of we had remote working capability, remote access, and full-blown virtual desktop and access to all our productivity and applications. However, it was not operated at the volume or capacity that it is operated at today. So I'm sure, like a lot of organizations, we've seen a huge pivot from, whereby, let's just say on an average workday, we might have, 20% of our workforce operating remotely. Well, now that's gone up to, 80% or whatever the case may be. So there's been a huge uplift. So as a result of that, we've had to look at aspects like capacity planning. So to make sure in terms of, the capacity on the back end systems, is it sufficient that if we have 100% of people connected, can we still provision? Likewise, for those limited people or limited numbers that weren't connected to remote access historically, that we obviously had to make that available for them. But yeah, I guess it was a question of uplifting rather than reinventing the wheel. Another one here: how can an organization manage the levels of access for employees and usage, such as internet usage and company devices at home, to ensure improper access or exposure to security breaches? So yeah, it's a good question. So really, you can't obviously you can't do that. It depends on your provisioning, your access to your application. So in a BYO environment, say for example, if you were enabling people access through their own laptop or their own tablet device, well then you can't fundamentally control, for example, browser usage. But what you can do is, even in that scenario, is that you can have policies around interaction with the corporate data. So, for example, if a user is working away on corporate data within a corporate app, but they try to copy and paste it onto a non-corporate app or into a personal browser session, well, then you can have controls around that. Are there any lessons learned in your move to a more mobile and agile workforce that would change how you approach projects in the future? So yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think again, we've been fortunate in terms of the pace that we were able to adapt to remote access due to the previous approach and just scaling up. But yeah, there have been lessons learned. So as we've extended the mobile and the collaboration tools, I guess a key takeaway from me is kind of making sure that the users are trained and educated in terms of the capabilities of those tools, what they can and can't do, but also trying to avoid tactical solutions. And I know that's easier said than done, because there will always be, absolute top priorities, and you have to put exceptions in place, for example, authorizing non-corporate applications. But I'd advise you to keep those tactical solutions to a minimum, because that's certainly a lesson learned from me, is because the more tactical solutions you learn, you enable, the more fixing up there is to do retrospectively. So when you do move to a corporate approved enterprise ready solution, then you're going to have to go back and retrospectively remove access to tactical, what date has been exchanged, how do you recover it, all that. So it's that can be a challenge. Did COVID-19 require a change in mindset in regards to risk management or risk assessment to support the needs of the business? So yeah, we had to become more agile in our approach, because traditional risk assessments, for example, and governance can take a significant amount of time. And when you're operating in a remote environment, agile environment where there's demands for mobility and collaboration tools in a short period of time, you can't really stick with the traditional processes, or you're going to encounter issues changing with the traditional processes. So I guess what a good approach there could be would be, when you're looking at your traditional risk assessments, perhaps adapting an approach that's more bespoke or unique to your organization. So you could look at something like an attack path based risk assessment. So what are the tangible threats to your organization, and risk assess them. So rather than trying to boil the ocean, look at the risks as they stand unique to your organization, and assess them and get comfortable with that level of risk and make your decision based on that. Like it's more timely, but it's also more effective in terms of protecting your organization. Another approach is to make sure that as you move to mobile, that and you're increasing the access to these tools, is that you update your information security standards to reflect that. So there might be aspects that you never thought of. So a good one that I came across was in terms of updating our standards to say, like, listen, if you're working, if you've remote access and you're working in a shared environment, that to make sure that where your screen is visible, that you're not sharing sensitive information with anyone else that you're cohabiting with. So who has access to your screen? Do you need to get a screen protector? Do you need to update your information security standards to kind of educate your staff and your employees on the same issues? Has low or no broadband in areas been an issue for your remote access workers? So yeah, that's a good question. So we would have remote access workers all over the country, and sorry, I'll just come back. I forgot to re-enable my camera there. The remote access or broadband in remote areas, yes. So yes is the answer to that. How do we deal with that? Well, there's a couple of approaches. One is we can support, obviously, mobile broadband connections, but also, there's kind of tactical approaches there in terms of, you could look at disabling video capability for remote users who are in broadband restricted areas and focus on voice only. Yes, it's not ideal, but it could be a way of throttling the broadband usage and dealing with the capacity constraints in place. Do you include the in-tune with company policies for information security management systems, or is it all automatically enforced? How do you keep the balance? So yeah, it's good. It's a good question. So in terms of the company policies, we try to keep them at a sufficiently high level, because, as you said there, it's about managing a balance. Because on the technical configuration perspective, you can get as granular as you want, but in terms of the guidance and the policies, if you get too detailed, it's just going to become really kind of just really unwieldy in terms of the management piece and how you enforce those the standards and how you measure them. So yeah, I guess it really is about keeping that balance and having it high level in the sufficiently high level in the standards and the policies, but then getting into the technical detail in your device configuration and technical configurations, but at the same time making sure that you can measure against those technical configurations and report on them, as I mentioned in the presentation. Will 4G and 5G make business continuity for remote workforce easier, and how will this be used for a large organization? So yeah, I guess that links in nicely with the question around managing users in kind of remote locations that have poor broadband connectivity. So certainly 4G and 5G will assist in that regard. So if they have a strong mobile connection, well, that can be used in substitute for Wi-Fi, but standardized Wi-Fi. But then you also need to be cognizant of your data utilization and the costs of managing that. So you could look at enhancing your mobile device security tooling to actually have additional modules that look at analyzing data utilization and managing that effectively. So looking at, what applications are users using the data up, for example, so if they're connected to the remote access session on Cisco or Citrix or whatever it might be, that's fine, and you permit that. But if you suddenly get a load of users and you can see that the data has been consumed on Netflix, well then that's not so good, both in terms of productivity, but also that it's going to drive up your data utilization costs. So, did COVID-19 introduce any new challenges in how you maintained secure services to your workforce? So yeah, I guess again this touches on the other question. We just had to be cognizant in terms of scaling up, not just the technology but also our security services. So making sure those mobile device management capabilities were on all our mobility devices. So making sure if there was any gaps that they were identified. Also, in terms of your reporting and your configuration in line with best practice. So I'm sure, like most regulated entities, we would have, scheduled activities. So, for example, reporting on the configuration and adherence to best practice in terms of our servers and the configuration of mobile devices. But what we had to look at during COVID-19 was, because the sudden large pivot to remote working, was that we actually move forward our schedule such that the review in line with best practice was done now and not wait until the kind of scheduled review. So it was more timely, given the pivot to remote access, but that we were making sure that right now we're configured and in line with best practice and industry standards, as opposed to waiting for, as I said, that scheduled report, whether it traditionally be kind of quarterly, whatever the case may be. What was the biggest challenge in terms of moving to remote workforce model? Well, I think like a lot of organizations, speaking in regards to my own team, I found that initially the challenge around, that lack of, physical engagement with my team. So not being able to go into the office and whiteboard sessions and brainstorm as a group, that was a bit of a challenge, being honest with you initially. What we've done, you would still miss obviously the physical interaction, and there's no shorter or no substitute for that. However, through the expanded use of our collaboration tools and virtual whiteboards and good stuff like that, we can do virtual brainstorming sessions. You have the video collaboration, you've all that good stuff. But kind of a positive angle that I take on that is that I've actually found that by moving to a remote workforce, by having daily kind of checkpoints with my team, and I'm not talking about a daily hour meeting, I'm talking even just a 5-minute checkpoint call every day, which is outside of your weekly team meeting or whatever the case may be. A 5-point checkpoint just to go open the line, get everyone in the team on the call and say, right folks, how's everyone getting on today? And what's top of your agenda, just one item each. And I found just having that daily checkpoint is really, really good, because it promotes the collaboration, but it also gives you early visibility of any issues, as opposed to waiting to your scheduled team meeting. So I think that's it, both in terms of content and in terms of the Q&A. So I'd really like to thank everyone for your engagement there, and thanks for joining, and thanks to ICT Skillnet for the invitation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programs. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.